I'd like to introduce Laura Pidcock. Who can forget Laura's speech at the last Durham Miners Gala? I listen to it when I need to raise my spirits and get on with the work, so I go back to that time and time again. We need her words and her campaigning spirit now more than ever. So I was delighted to hear that Laura was chairing Richard's campaign. And whether inside or outside Parliament, Laura demonstrates the courage and honesty that is needed right now. And here she is.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me here tonight, and it is an absolute pleasure to chair your campaign, Richard, and it is a pleasure also to follow Huda, who I greatly respect too. Richard brought me very quickly out of an enforced political retirement, and I was pleased to accept. I think it's well known, but Richard is a very good friend of mine and was one of the closest political comrades when in Parliament, and it is a very, very lonely place in Westminster, and there are a handful of socialists, essentially, that you can count on to be unequivocal in their politics. I mean, I can imagine every single one of you in this room is still very much in pain at the general election result, that you've not quite adjusted yet to a world where Boris Johnson has a huge majority in Parliament, where no fancy political Westminster games can stop his plans at all. And I know that I am definitely still coming to terms with that reality, because the magnitude of that defeat is colossal. It is absolutely historic. I know how much time, love, passion, commitment you will have given in that general election campaign. I know the sacrifices that you'll have taken too, the dog bites. For those who know about the dog bites, the worn-out shoes, the thousands of conversations to end up with a Tory majority. You just can't believe it. It could be really soul-destroying, as Huda said, if we allowed it to be soul-destroying. I don't need to spell out the costs, the political costs of what it means to our communities and to our class either, because you in this room are the teachers, the teaching assistants, the train drivers. You are the people on the minimum rate of pay, which would have by now, if we had a Labour government, been £10, I am sure of that. And we know intimately what it means to have a Tory government for another 5 years, and therefore we have two options, do we not? There's only two options. We can despair in isolation, we can retreat politically and chalk it all up to a painful political experience and an interesting chapter in our lives, or we can get back up and try and understand exactly what happened, what went wrong. We can build back better and make sure we never, ever let a defeat like that happen again on our watch. And I am sure I know which path you have chosen in this room. It really is quite a stark contrast to go just a matter of weeks ago from being Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights, very, very excited about the manifesto of work. We were going to introduce a planned economy, sectoral collective bargaining at the heart of the economy, making sure that terms and conditions were not imposed on workers, but they were negotiated, that working people truly had power back in their workplace. The minimum rate of pay, as I said, would be £10 per hour, and lots of individual working rights would have been rapidly improved. And we lost that. We lost that political opportunity. And when you see the ballot papers, I'm sure many of you will have been at a count in this room on that night, but when you see the ballot papers come in for the Conservative candidates stack up, you know, in northwest Durham, the Tory candidate beat me with over 1,000 votes. A former steel working community, a former mining county. You have to really take a cold, hard look at what went on. People still experiencing the scars of Thatcherism and neoliberalism. It's shocking. And I don't think my opponent would disagree either that we vastly outnumbered him in terms of activists. He would accept that, but his party won. And we have to take a look at that pattern that happened across the country too. But what I will not accept, and I know Richard does not accept either, is that our defeat was a defeat of socialist principles. It was not a defeat of socialist principles. I will not draw from it either that the simplistic and lazy analysis that it was Jeremy Corbyn who delivered that defeat, as if we are to ignore the 4 years of persistent slandering of his name, the persistent attacks on his character and his politics. But nor will I either have it that the central architects of the catastrophic Brexit position should lead the party in the next 5 years. It is therefore absolutely crucial in my mind that we keep the flame of socialism alive, that we are able to do that in the face of such huge attacks. And that's just one reason why I was very happy to be the chair of Richard's campaign and why I'm very happy to back him all of the way. The attacks are huge from the capitalist class, those who see fellow humans as commodities, pressure from the owners of multinational corporations, pressure from people who care more about their profits than the future of the planet, pressure from the shameless sections of the shameless media. The pressure to capitulate is huge when you are in Westminster, when you are in those positions of great responsibility. The pressure is immense, and therefore your principles must be guided not only by what will win you votes or what will make you the most popular, but you must seek to make it your ambition to do politics the other way around, in my view, to make popular your principles and advance socialist arguments to the point it creates the broadest unity amongst working class communities, to win hearts and minds. And that is why, as I've said repeatedly, if you've not got the message by now, I'm backing Richard Burgon to be the deputy leader of the party. You're here tonight, hopefully, because you're backing Richard, or you're here and you're open to being convinced by him. You've made the right decision. This is the right room to be in. We cannot and must not shrink back. I've not seen that once from Richard Burgon. I worked alongside him in Parliament for those 2.5 years that I had the privilege to represent people in North West Durham. We can't shrink back because the global political crisis will deepen. That is a certainty. The Conservatives will, at best, deeply disappoint working class communities right across the northern region, and to be frank, every single region. But they will more than that, more than disappointing people. They will entrench poverty. Of course, they will not eradicate in-work poverty. Of course, they will not stand up to the capitalists who, as I said, put profits before the planet. It is only socialism which has the answer. That should give us so much confidence to back a brilliant socialist candidate for deputy leader, to keep that flame of socialism alive, to ignore the word triangulation, whatever it means to you anyway. And I think tonight I'm proud, very proud. I thought I was introducing Richard, but I'll just say it anyway. I'm very proud to just be in this room in support and with you as committed socialists as well, to support Richard's ambitions to be deputy leader of the Labour Party, because it is an important role. He will be a great defender of the members. You've seen an important announcement today, hopefully, but I'm sure Richard will talk about that. He doesn't see himself in that parliamentary Labour Party as above the membership. I am sure he does not. He sees himself of the membership, one of the members of the movement too. It is so important that we have somebody with those values in the deputy leader position. It's my pleasure. Thanks for bringing me out of a very short retirement, Richard. And good luck to you all here securing his nominations. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Laura. That's wonderful. And thank you, Richard, for bringing Laura out of retirement, as she says. But I'm sure there will be much more for us to look forward to. The first time I heard Richard speaking, and I want to reflect what Laura has just said, I was one of almost 2,000 people at the launch rally for Jeremy's second leadership campaign in July 2016 at the Lowry in Salford Quays. When Richard took to the platform, one of his key points was to defend us. It was a time when Jeremy's supporters and the membership were under horrendous pressure and attacks. And Richard's words were, "I'm not going to stand by and see every single one of you portrayed as the striking miners were, as thugs, brick throwers, and bullies." And since then, as Laura says, Richard has always supported and involved Labour members and committed to empowering us, always talking about we, not I. Richard is on our side, the side of the membership, the workers, and the oppressed, and that is why I am supporting Richard for deputy, and why I'm delighted that the LRC and also my union, Unite, are also doing so. Richard is also secretary for the campaign group of Socialist MPs, whose rallies are always a highlight for me, and many of us, I'm sure, at Labour Party conference. Laura talked about flames, sort of reflecting some of the words of Tony Benn. And I think Tony Benn would definitely describe Richard Burgon as a signpost rather than a weather vane floating whichever way the political wind blows. Richard is a signpost pointing out and keeping to our socialist principles. Nothing Richard has said or pledged in his deputy leadership campaign so far has come as a surprise to me. None of his commitments sound like electioneering, because they're not, because his promises are rooted in his consistent principles and campaigning over many years. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Richard Burgon.
Thank you very much, and it feels kind of awkward to hear all these nice things being said about me. I feel as if I've been brought back to life at my own funeral. I'm listening to people saying what a jolly good chap he was, although by the time I expire, maybe people won't like me so much. We shall see. But it's a great pleasure to be with all of you and a great privilege to be with all of you. And thanks also to Laura and Huda. I'm very proud that Huda is the BAME coordinator for our campaign, because I think it's very, very important that we remain an anti-racist party. It's very important that we don't return to the days of the controls on immigration mugs. It's very important we don't return to the days of sidling up to the so-called legitimate concerns of racists. We can't return to those days. And I'm very proud that Huda's supporting me as such an effective advocate for members on our National Executive Committee. And I'm very pleased that Laura's chairing my campaign. We need, if she agrees, to get Laura back into Parliament as soon as possible. Although, of course, one of the reasons we need Laura back in Parliament is that she's one of those socialists who realises that the class struggle doesn't just take place in Parliament. Parliament is only one of the arenas in which we must engage in that struggle on behalf of the communities we represent and the communities we seek to represent. So why am I standing to be deputy leader? It's not just because Tom Watson was always one of my big heroes. That's not only the reason I'm standing to be deputy leader. The reason I'm standing to be deputy leader is because all of us have been through too much together in the last few years to ditch our socialist politics even after such a devastating election defeat. All of us have been through too much over these years to ditch our anti-war internationalist politics even in the aftermath of a devastating election defeat. And all of us have been through too much in the last few years to ditch our anti-racist politics, even in the aftermath of a devastating election defeat. And when I say been through a lot, I'm not on about the Shadow Cabinet and members of Parliament. I'm on about all of you. We referred to earlier, the awful things that were said when they were trying to get rid of Jeremy, the awful things that were said not just about Jeremy, but about you, about Labour Party members. And I think it was and is important to stand up for Labour Party members. People who give up their spare time in all weathers to go out and try and get a Labour government, to go out and try and secure a better society here at home and abroad around the world as well. And when I say we've been through too much together to give up our socialist politics now or surrender it. I mean, I'll never forget, as long as I'll live, that Parliamentary Labour Party meeting in that hot summer of July 2016. There was no place to sit, no place left to sit at that Parliamentary Labour Party meeting. It was full, completely full. Why was it full? Because members of the Parliamentary Labour Party thought what was on the agenda was getting rid of Jeremy Corbyn. What they thought was on the agenda, by extension, was getting rid of our socialist policies. What they thought was on the agenda, by extension, was really making sure that all of you were got rid of as well. And there was nowhere to sit or no seats to sit in. I remember sitting on a step next to Lavery, because that's what we call him, not because I went to a public school, because I didn't, but we just call him Lavery. And he turned to me and he said, and I won't do an impression of him because he might see this on the live stream. He might get annoyed with me, and I wouldn't want that to happen. Lavery turned to me and said, "We're in a spot of bother here, you know, Richard." This was as people were shouting and screaming at Jeremy, demanding he stand down. I even remember Barry Gardiner standing up, and in that special Barry Gardiner, very reasonable way, asking people to stop screaming at Jeremy. Just let him be heard, please. And a Labour MP who won't I won't mention her name, but she told him to shut up and sit down. She was screaming at him for even calling on people to treat the elected leader of the Labour Party with respect. So I'll never forget that night. In my memory, it seems to me rather like that scene towards the end of Robert Tressel's The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists, where Owen, the hero of that book, is being screamed at and shouted at for advocating socialist policies. But myself, Labour and others left that Parliamentary Labour meeting, cognizant of the fact that the Labour movement isn't just the Parliamentary Labour Party, cognizant of the fact that the Labour Party isn't just the Parliamentary Labour Party. And we went out into Parliament Square and there were 10,000 Labour and trade union members there. We got on top of a fire engine lent to us by the Fire Brigades Union, and it was great to see all those people. Dennis Skinner spoke, Jeremy spoke, Dan Abbott spoke, Rebecca Long Bailey spoke. We all spoke and we felt that connection, but we also felt the huge debt that we owed to those Labour and trade union members and that huge responsibility we owed, not to give in, but to actually step up to the plate. And the message from those Labour members was clear. The message of unity to take the fight to the Tories, the message of party democracy, and the message of carrying on and not giving up. So we didn't give up. I ended up taking on 3 jobs, as many of us did. Not like these Tories that take on 3 jobs to fill the pockets, but I took on 3 jobs, I think, on the front bench, Shadow Justice Secretary, Shadow Treasury Minister and something or other else, because people were resigning left, right and centre, on the hour, every hour, almost as if it was scheduled for the news bulletins. People who weren't even household names in their own house were resigning from positions. Were resigning from positions no one ever knew they had till they resigned from them. And these people were elevated to the status of political titans by the commentariat. Why were they elevated to the position of political titans by the commentariat? Because they were fulfilling that responsibility of trying to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn and trying to get rid of socialist policies. And I'll never forget, as long as I'll live, and I don't tell this as a sob story, I just tell it as a little vignette, if that's the word. Sat there on the front bench, I stood up to speak at the dispatch box. The benches were empty behind me because members of Parliament had other things to do other than being members of Parliament, plotting whatever they're up to, trying to get rid of Jeremy. And I spoke at the dispatch box, something I hadn't done that much of because still I was a relatively new MP. I've only been elected for the first time in 2015 to represent my home constituency. And Jonathan Woodcock was behind me. Do you remember him? Yeah. And Jonathan Woodcock, as I was speaking, was just saying again and again and again, he was saying, Burgon's useless, Burgon's rubbish, Burgon doesn't know what he's doing. And I remember him saying that. It didn't bother me, to be honest. But I remember, because you can judge someone in politics by their foes as well as their friends. But he was saying that. And I think, really, we know what happened to Jonathan Woodcock. He let the party down. He let his constituents down. If I had a higher opinion of him, I'd say I let himself down as well. But he didn't let himself down because what he did was entirely in keeping with his politics and his political character. But these are the things that I remember. I also remember, who can forget, the days when Labour leaders couldn't bring themselves to support workers on strike. Do you remember that? When we used to get excited or satisfied when a Labour leader didn't condemn a strike. We'd think, well, he didn't support the strike, but at least he didn't condemn it. That's brilliant. He didn't condemn it on TV. He didn't say these strikes are wrong, these strikes are wrong, these strikes are wrong. He didn't condemn the strike on TV. We can't go back to those days. We can't go back to the days when Labour members like you were treated or are treated as the unpaid postal workers of the Labour movement, pushing leaflets through doors with no democratic say about the policies that end up on those leaflets. We can't return to the days of the controls on immigration mugs, and we can't return to the days of supporting illegal wars like the war in Iraq. We can't return to the days of private sector good, public sector bad, and we can't return to the days where we only oppose Tory austerity, when we only oppose cuts if they went too far, too fast. So that's why I'm standing for deputy leader. And I'm proud to be from the left of the party. I'm proud to be secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs, set up by Tony Benn and Dennis Skinner as a grouping for left MPs within the Parliamentary Labour Party. I'm proud to be supported by fighting unions, the Bakers Union, Unite the Union, the Fire Brigades Union. I'm proud to be supported by Huda and by Laura, and I'm proud to be supported by socialists who I grew up looking up to. Dennis Skinner, John McDonnell and Diane Abbott. So I'm proud of that, but I feel a responsibility. And I think we need to protect the three pillars of Corbynism, the three pillars of the socialist gains we've made in the last few years with Jeremy as leader. And that's why the first big announcement of my deputy leadership campaign was to say that I support open selections, so that Labour members and trade unions can choose their parliamentary candidate in a fully democratic way at each and every general election. Because if it's not the members and the trade unions who decide who are the parliamentary candidates, then who is it? Would it be the MPs who decide who the parliamentary candidates are? I mean, I would personally reselect myself without a shadow of a doubt. On most days, I'd give myself 100% of the votes. If I'm feeling a bit down or have read my Twitter mentions, I might give myself 65 or 70%. But on a serious note, people are not going to take our ambitions seriously for democratising the fifth most sophisticated and richest capitalist economy in the world if we can't even democratise our process for selecting who stands for us at each election. So I do support open selections, and I do think as well, when we think of the behaviour before the 2017 general election, that kind of evaluation process by our managers, i.e. our party members, would have a wonderful effect of effectively concentrating people's mind on the job in hand, which I think is important. So I announced I'm backing open selection. I also announced that I think we need a new Clause 4, because the Clause 4 introduced by Tony Blair is now a quarter of a century old and much more than a quarter of a century out of date. It removed the commitment to public ownership. Now, when we face the threat of climate catastrophe caused by free market capitalism's pursuit of profit before people and profit before planet, we need more than ever a Clause 4 which hardwires support for public ownership and opposition to privatisation into the constitution of our Labour Party. We need a clause 4 which sets out the aims and objectives of a socialism fit for the 21st century. So that would mean that the gains we've made, because it hasn't always been the case that the Labour Party supported public ownership of rail, mail and water. We can hardwire those things into the party's constitution so that whatever happens, we will never retreat from the principle of public ownership and against privatisation. And also, I want to make a third announcement tonight, which has been trailed in a colourful piece in The Guardian earlier today, and that's about international policy. But let me preface that by saying commentators and pundits who say that international policy is some kind of hobby politics or some kind of distraction or some kind of optional extra are completely wrong. What do they think governments do? What do they think goes on in the Foreign Office? It's not an empty building. One of the most important functions of the government is to govern our relationships with other governments around the world. So what you'll find when people say, why are you interested in international politics? These are the very people who consciously or subconsciously are advocating the status quo. Because if we as a party and we as a movement are not interested in internationalist politics and international politics, then the only people practicing international politics are the kind of people who supported the war in Iraq, the kind of people who support the bombing of Yemen, the kind of people who believe the Palestinians shouldn't have a state alongside Israel, the kind of people who think the blockade on Cuba is fine. So we need to engage with that as well. Socialism doesn't stop at the borders of this country. Quite the reverse. It's my view that you can't be a socialist if you're not an internationalist. And so our anti-war internationalism is non-negotiable in my view. And so that's why I'm announcing today this peace pledge. Because Labour, let's be honest, remains scarred by the experience of the Iraq war. For many, it's sadly the single act for which the last Labour government, despite all the good things it did, is most remembered. It was a conflict opposed by most Labour Party members at the time. Jeremy rightly apologised for Labour's role in the disastrous and illegal war at the time of the publication of the Chilcot report back in 2016. But even since the Iraq war, Labour mistakenly backed the intervention in Libya, which has had catastrophic consequences for that country and contributed to a massive refugee crisis. These interventions were supposed to have made us safer from terrorism. Tragically, they failed in that objective too. We must always take a stand on the side of international law and on the side of justice. That means a foreign policy robustly independent of the United States. And no decision is more important for a political party than whether or not to support military action. It's right that if the Labour Party wants to back military action, then it must have the explicit backing of the party's members, except in the case of a genuine national emergency or with United Nations backing, which in relation to the war in Iraq clearly wasn't the case. Never again should Labour members ever have the shame of having to protest, not in my name, against their own party. So with this peace pledge in place, the British people can be confident that the Labour Party will not repeat the mistakes of the past and wrongly back military conflict. So they're the three main pledges of my campaign. The pledge for open selection, the pledge for a new clause 4, hardwiring public ownership into the constitution of the party, and this peace pledge. The purpose of these pledges is to protect what I would call the three pillars of Corbynism: public ownership and anti-austerity, a democratic members-led party, and an anti-war internationalist party. And I think these things are appropriate for a candidate for deputy leader to advocate, because the role of deputy leader has a particular relevance to the constitution of the party and the democratic functions of the party. So I am pleased to be with you tonight. I'm pleased to have so much support already, and obviously I do want some more support. So that's the point of a campaign, isn't it? But I think we're reaching a critical time. Of course, we need to learn the political, organisational and even technological lessons of that devastating defeat on the 12th of December. As Deputy Leader, I'll chair a special commission into how we win back all our heartlands, the 50-plus Leave seats included, that we lost. Within the first month of being Deputy Leader, I'll visit every constituency we lost at the last election. Within the first couple of months as Deputy Leader, I'll visit every constituency we need to win back in order to get into government. And by halfway through this parliamentary term, I'll visit every constituency in the UK. And what inspired me to come up with that idea was when I saw on that Twitter account, CLP nominations, it said that Orkney CLP had nominated me. And I thought, I've never been there. I've never had any plans to go there. I should definitely go there. And I don't mean to use like awful cliches, but I should imagine myself like on a boat chugging out there with some comrades to the Orkney Islands to address a CLP meeting in a little cosy pub somewhere. That would be great. But I'm proud to be with you tonight. We've been through a lot together. There is no future electorally or morally or politically for our party in going back to the future. The mid-90s were a different place, economically, politically and globally. We need to learn the lessons and move forward to victory. I believe in these volatile political times we can turn it round if we learn the lessons, and we can win the next general election. And when we do, that won't be the victory of any of the people, including myself, standing at those leadership or deputy leadership hustings. It won't be the victory of the shadow cabinet. It won't be the victory even of those of us looking up to be Labour MPs. It will be the victory of hundreds of thousands of Labour Party members, of millions of trade unionists. But fundamentally, it will be the victory of millions of people who, if we get it right, at the next general election, will wake up on that Thursday morning and say, today is the day I go down to the polling station and vote for a Labour government and vote for a better society. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Richard Burgon, next Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, who will now be taking questions from the floor. I'll take 3 at a time together. I think Erica was going to use a roving mic, if that's okay, so that we can clearly hear the questions. Okay, so there's someone there in pink halfway down, and someone in lilac at the front, one more, gentleman in the Bernie shirt. So,
okay, I thought after the 2017 election that social media was going to really help Labour combat bias in the mainstream media. So I'd really like to know what, over the next 5 years, what on earth we're going to do about a constant harassment and terrible lies told about our members of Parliament and about socialists.
So this is a very direct question about the NHS. And it's about whether you will commit to fighting to change the framework of the law to ensure that privatisation of the NHS is a thing of the past and would never, ever happen again. And will you also commit to fighting to refund our public health services and social services up to the level at least of our neighbours in other rich countries such as Sweden or Germany or France.
That's quite loud. Yeah, firstly, is that all right? Yeah, I wanted to big thanks, Richard, for running. I think it's not an easy thing to do. It's obviously a grueling thing to do to go around the country, and especially, I think there's been certain institutions that probably should have backed you that haven't, and obviously you don't have the backing of the leadership candidate that most of us will be backing too. But obviously, I think it's a massive thing to do to take that step of really fighting for the members, as you've outlined, for the socialist wing of the party, and for democratization and internationalism. So that's obviously a massive commitment on your part, so big thanks. I think the question for me is, you never know. You might not win, Rebecca Long-Bailey might not win. In that instance, as members, as a movement, what do you think the strategy is to continue to fight for those things that you've outlined, whether it's party democratization, whether it's internationalism? How do we keep on, going? How do we, convince our comrades to not leave the party and to stay and fight? Yeah.
Liz Perrotts, Keep Our NHS Public, and Socialist Health Association, and long-term Labour Party member and Momentum member.
You don't have to give the name of every organisation. Some of us would be here, but I'm a member of about 20 organisations.
Yeah, I'm Chris Marsden. I'm the chair of a branch of Henley CLP.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm Chris Saltmarsh. I was one of the co-founders of Labour for a Green New Deal.
Pretty significant.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for those questions. In relation to Liz's two questions, in relation to social media, where's Liz? Oh, sorry, my notes, I apologise. Yeah, Christine, apologies. Christine, in relation to your question about social media, I think that the alt-right and other right-wing groups attached to the Conservative Party learnt some lessons from 2017. We caught the establishment sleeping in 2017. I don't think we're going to catch them sleeping again. So we nearly won, and they weren't going to make that mistake of underestimating us again. So some of the Facebook and Twitter operations they did to target potential Labour voters with some awful, slanderous, disgraceful, reactionary targeted ads needs to be looked at. And also, just as social media can be used to spread the truth, it can also be used to spread disinformation, sadly. Internationally and domestically, people are much more likely to believe something on Twitter if they think it's from an ordinary person, even though it may not be, than they are in a well-known newspaper, because it's got that kind of grassroots feel to it, and sometimes these things aren't quite as much as they seem. So I think it's important the Labour Party gets its act together with a YouTube channel that's actually good, where the Labour leader and others can speak regularly and answer questions from members of the public. I do think we have to work more closely with alternative media networks like Double Down News and Novara Media. And I think we need to up our social media game as well. I think that's important. In relation to the NHS and Liz's question, of course I commit that we should move away from privatisation in the NHS and should properly fund it. And that's the reason why I've proposed the clause 4, committing the Labour Party constitutionally to public ownership, because that should mean that everything our party does needs to be seen within that context of being constitutionally committed to support public ownership and to oppose privatisation. And then the final question from Chris, thanks for being so kind. It's not as hard as it seems. It's quite pleasant going around the country talking with wonderful members like you. As you say, I'm backing Becky for leader. I think she's the best candidate for leader to defend the anti-austerity politics that we've gained under Jeremy, and the best candidate for leader to obviously defend the Green New Deal which she devised. Your question is, if the left candidate for leader, Becky, and if the left candidate for deputy, myself, don't win, then how do you persuade Labour members to stay in? Well, we need to ensure, and that's one of the reasons I'm standing, because I'm overtly championing the left politics of Jeremy and Tony Benn and Eric Heffer and others before them, Bernie Grant and other members from the past from the Socialist Campaign Group. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's important that whatever the outcome of the leadership election, the deputy leadership election, it's important that the left socialist internationalist part of our Labour Party remains a vibrant part of our Labour Party. The Labour Party has always been a broad church of socialists, social democrats and trade unions. Sometimes some neoliberals have got involved, and I don't think that really should be part of Labour's broad church, but socialists, social democrats and trade unions. And we need to make sure that the left of the Labour Party, whatever the outcome of these elections, remains a vibrant part, and in a democratic party ensures that we have our say. But I'm not going to be defeatist about it. I believe Becky can win and become leader of the Labour Party. I believe she can become the first female leader of our Labour Party. Most people seem to agree that it's about time we had a female leader, but there you are. And I also think that I can win as deputy leader. I'm in it to win it. I'm not standing to be a paper candidate. When we analyse the results from the nomination meetings around the country, we've got, last time I think 25 CLP nominations, but in almost countless others we've finished a very close second indeed. And of course, the number of people who turn up to the CLP nomination meetings is only about 10% of the membership. So make no mistake, we can win this. We can win the leadership, we can win the deputy leadership. But whatever happens, I would say don't leave the party. We've been through too much together to leave the Labour Party. And if people don't like the outcome of the leadership and deputy leadership election, if we don't win, then the lesson is to be more effective next time. The lesson is not to give up, because as I say, we've been through too much together. And it's not just the last 4 or 5 years. Remember, Jeremy, John McDonnell, Diane and others were working at this for 30, 40 years to keep the left alive in the Labour Party in even more difficult circumstances than this. And if people walk away, then I'm afraid, whether they realise it or not, what they are saying is that basically the last few years were all a waste of time. I don't believe it was a waste of time, and that's why I won't give up. And the last thing I'll say on this is really from an internationalist perspective. Somebody said to me the other day, is it hard to speak up for the rights of the Palestinian people because people say nasty things about you when you say it? Of course it's not hard to speak up for the rights of the Palestinian people, and of course it's not hard to be a member of parliament on the left. People with our politics in different countries get shot, get put in prison, get put on trial and get tortured. I'm sure that I can manage with a few nasty tweets, a few nasty articles about me in The Spectator. So let's, all of us, keep on going. And that's something I do remember that Tony Benn, when I was a young, unknown activist, sent to me, because you're always really good at encouraging people. He sent me a Christmas card when I was a young lad, and all it said in it on the back was, keep on going. I think that's a very important message.
Thank you. I know there are loads of questions, and we do have time to just have one more quick round, if that's okay. Oh my goodness, lots and lots of hands. So this gentleman at the front had his hand up first, so that seems fair. There's someone there in a check shirt by the door, and the gentleman with glasses towards the back there. And could you keep your questions quite short, and I'll also ask Richard to keep his answers fairly short as well. Thank you. And remember to give your name and one organisation. Thank you.
Bill McKeith, Oxford Central Branch, Labour Party. Can you talk us through why it was the right decision for you, unlike other candidates, not to accept the demands of the Board of Deputies, the Jewish Board of Deputies?
I wanted to ask about, it's music to my ears, by the way, hearing you talk about being with the members in that way. I experienced a lot of harassment online and in person in the lead up to the last election, to the point that I ended up with a dedicated police officer and a swastika sprayed on the side of my home. And I found myself in the really bizarre position that I got more support from the Tory opposition councillors than I did from my own party in that process. And while my comrades in this room were amazing, and thank you to Momentum and Jewish Voice for Labour, by the way, whose many messages and flowers and offers of a sofa probably kept me through that period. But that the structures within the Labour Party just were non-existent to support me with that. Can you promise to look at how you support members who are targeted with far-right harassment? And of course, part of that targeting is about targeting of allegations as well, because they orchestrate pylons, so it gets complicated in with our complaints processes, it gets complicated in with media stuff. And I've seen some awful things happen to comrades up and down the country, and how we advocate for that, because it shouldn't be down to Tory councillors to be the ones that are supporting me through that. Thank you.
Hi, hi, I'm Doug. I'm not really part of any important organisation. I was just wondering, you said you didn't want to go back to the times of like anti-immigration mugs, which I don't think anyone wants to. Do you support the free movement conference policy which was passed and like the general Labour campaign for free movement? And would you like try and make sure that Labour goes into the next election pledging to bring back free movement, extend it, scrap detention centres, all that?
Okay, thanks very much. In relation to Bernard's question about, can I explain why I didn't sign up to the Board of Deputies 10 pledges, I actually agree with most of the pledges, but some of them gave me cause for concern. Firstly, this idea that I would sign up to agree not to engage with so-called Jewish, so-called fringe Jewish groups. Now, as a non-Jewish person in particular, I'm very uncomfortable at the idea of me declaring which is a fringe Jewish group and which isn't a fringe Jewish group. I believe it is important to work with the Board of Deputies to fight anti-Semitism and a whole host of other issues. I also think it's important to work with other Jewish organisations right across the Jewish community. As a constituency MP... Oh dear. Somebody wants to come in. As a constituency MP, it would be seen as rather unreasonable if I were to say in Leeds, I'm speaking to this Kurdish group from Leeds, but I'm certainly not prepared to speak to any other Kurdish group from Leeds. Or for us to say, I'm going to speak to this Nigerian community group, but no other Nigerian community groups. I see it as not being for me to decide and for no other group to dictate. So yes, work with the Board of Deputies, but yes, work with other Jewish groups right across the community. And what does fringe group mean? What about Haredi Jewish people? Are they a fringe group? What about LGBT Jewish groups? What about black Jewish groups? What about the Jewish socialist group? So this concept of fringe Jewish groups gives me concern. I think we need to be more inclusive and open than that. And also the pledge about outsourcing Labour's complaints and disciplinary process. I'm yet to hear an example of any organisation that successfully outsourced its complaints procedure. So that gives me concern as well. I want to hear more about that. And finally, I want to be further reassured that signing up to all of those pledges doesn't prevent us from speaking up for the rights of the Palestinian people. it's vitally important that we speak out against anti-Semitism. It's also vitally important that we speak up for the rights of the Palestinian people. For me, these things are separate, distinct, but both of them, there's a moral obligation on all of us in our movement to do both of these things. See, I'm sorry to hear about the abuse and harassment you've suffered from far-right groups. And one of the most galling things for me personally at the election, because of course you get used to being accused of X, Y, and Z, unfortunately, as a political candidate, was where people on the far right were accusing us of being racist. You know, that's really concerning. People in organised far-right groups. And so I'm sorry to hear that you suffered this as well. I think it's very important indeed that the party properly supports not only councillors and members of parliament and candidates for council and candidates for parliament, but also all members, because being a political activist can end up making you a public figure. It can end up attracting abuse, attracting harassment, even unfortunately in some cases your own well-being being put at risk. I think it's vitally important that the party protects people, that it protects activists and protects members. So I think more needs to be done in relation to that. In relation to the question on free movement. Free movement as a legal concept ends because we're out of the European Union. And I think it's important that when, as this, it said this in the manifesto, is that when we formulate a new migration policy, it's a migration policy that's humane, refuses to scapegoat, and values not just the economic contribution of migrants, because that's a bit economistic, but values the social and cultural contribution of migration to our community as well. Some people have pointed out that the free movement within the European Union was limited in that it kind of gave priority to migrants from a certain background. I know, for example, that many of my constituents of Kashmiri heritage would wonder why, for example, they had to jump through so many hoops for their mother to visit them for 4 weeks, for example, and I would need to get involved. So I think we need a new progressive migration policy. Free movement as such ends because we won't be in, we're not in the European Union, but we must never, as you say, return to the days of control on migration mugs. And I think the Labour Party has shown a good example on this in recent years. I have noticed that immigration, in inverted commas, has been raised less and less on the doorstep in recent years. It used to be raised on the doorstep more when we used to go on about it all the time, to be blunt. So when we used to have the control on immigration mugs, when I knocked on doors, people would moan about there being, to quote, too many migrants, more than they do now. And that reminds us our responsibility as a political movement to lead the debate. Because if you're not careful, otherwise you end up reinforcing, legitimising, or even fueling certain reactionary views in society. So our policy on migration, as on everything else, has to be led by our principles and our values, not by trying to chase good headlines in the right-wing newspapers, not by trying to out-Brexit the Brexit Party, and not by trying to take a leaf from Boris Johnson's book.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. We want to leave some time at the end just for some important notices about how everyone can take the next steps in supporting Richard's campaign. But because we've got these wonderful people here, I might just take 2 more really quick questions and answers, if that's all right. So the woman at the end who had her hand up last time, in the grey sleeves, the chap at the back with the tattoo on his arm, and the woman with the purple scarf. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Abby. I don't think I have any organisations, sorry. Thanks for coming to chatting to us. I wanted to ask whether, as Deputy Leader, you will fight to ensure that the party enables sex workers to have a voice within the Labour Party by helping to enact full decriminalisation of sex workers' party policy so that sex workers can access the same workplace rights and organise cooperatively and through trade unions as other workers do.
Hi, thank you for coming to Oxford. My name is Jimmy Harris. I'm the chair of the Oxfordshire Fire Brigade Union. Obviously, you're aware that the FBU have nationally endorsed both yourself and Rebecca. However, there are a lot of trade union members within the FBU and other unions who I feel are disillusioned with the party currently. We would have to be forced to think that every trade member is a staunch Labour supporter. I'm sad to say they are not. Within the FBU, frustratingly, I have members who are still bitter because of the industrial action we took with the last Labour government, albeit 17 years ago. And I do think this is a very convenient argument for some to use this as an excuse to vote Tory. I know that the Labour Party of today is far from the Blair government in the early 2000s. I also have members who have lost faith in Labour because of the way Brexit was handled. For things to get better in this country, we all agree we need a strong and active trade union movement. It is the backbone of the Labour movement. So as potential leaders, how do Labour regain the trust and increase the engagement of members with Labour? Because if we want a better society, better living conditions and improved workers' rights, it needs the full strength of the unions behind them to keep this government out of power.
Hello, my name is Arthur Alexander. I'm a member of the Labour Party, obviously. I wondered, how are you going to win back the people in Scotland from the SNP? And particularly since the big issue is Trident, getting rid of the nuclear deterrent. That's one of the greatest issues that Scotland has. And in Orkney, I'm just wondering how strong the Labour Party is there, and are they...
It counts as nomination, that's all we need to know.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so I obviously made a mistake because you've saved up the most complicated questions to the end. So I'll pass on to Richard for a quick answer to all of those.
Okay. Thanks very much. In relation to the question about sex workers, I've met with different women's groups and different feminist groups have different opinions on this. What I think we need to do is have a full, rigorous, respectful debate and discussion about this issue, where people such as myself should play as small a role as possible, in my view. But then what we should do is have a policy decided democratically by the party that is then implemented. So I want to see the party make policies on these issues. And for example, with sex workers being disproportionately women, I think it would be very appropriate for the special women's conference, which I'm glad now has policy-making powers, to have a full debate and discussion on this and to pass policy in relation to that. In relation to the comments by the comrade from the FBU, thanks for that. I agree with what you're saying. No one can presume that all trade union members, or even necessarily the majority of trade union members, back Labour. We can't take that for granted. We need to defend and strengthen the trade union link, because the trade union link isn't just important for reasons of nostalgia, the fact that the union set up the Labour Party. It isn't just important for reasons of the generous funding that unions give us to enable us to fight elections. It's important because the trade union link, unique actually in Europe. The trade union link gives us a window or a link into the working lives of millions and millions of people in this country. And we need to work firmly with the trade unions in order to limit the excesses of this government with an 80-seat majority. We need to fight back against the push towards Thatcherism 2.0, not just in Parliament, but on the picket line as well. So something that's disturbed me in recent years is the false division that's sometimes opened up between left comrades in the CLPs and left comrades in the trade unions. We need a left across the trade union and Labour movement working together. In relation to the question about Scotland, I'll find out when I visit how strong the Labour Party is in Orkney. They nominated Jeremy Corbyn, they got that one right. They nominated Richard Leonard, so they got that one right on 2 scores. One, he was the most left-wing candidate. Secondly, he's a Leeds United fan, though he doesn't talk about that much in Scotland, for obvious reasons. And then they nominated me as well, which I was delighted about, so I think they got that one right too. But on a serious note, in how do we win back Scotland, what we need to do as a party, and this is where I see the role of deputy leader as being an organiser or a campaigner-in-chief, we need to empower our Scottish comrades and let them take the political decisions. Just as I think I would be a good person to ask about how we do well in seats like my own in Leeds, I think we should ask our comrades in Scotland what the answer to this problem is, but ensure that they have the resources, the personnel, and everything they need in terms of infrastructure to fight that battle successfully. So they should be given the political leadership, and we should give the organisational and administrative support. So I think that's very important as well. But we need to recognise, and I'll finish on this really, that the disaster we faced in Scotland a couple of elections ago, or 3 elections ago, was a long time in the making. It wasn't just our dreadful mishandling of that referendum which sowed the seeds of that defeat. What sowed the seeds of that defeat was this attitude, which I remember even as a young person in the mid-90s as a Labour member, this attitude, don't worry about the voters in Scotland, they've got nowhere else to go. As you say the same about people in the north of England, don't worry about them, they've got nowhere else to go. Eventually they find somewhere else to go. Whether it's the SNP in Scotland, UKIP and then the Brexit Party in the north of England, or even people supposedly lending the vote to Boris Johnson to get that Brexit done. And we need to ensure that we don't take any of our supporters for granted. And I really will finish on this. When we're talking about the working class, we need to be talking about the working class in all its diversity. So we must not throw BAME communities under the bus. We must not presume just because they voted for us in great numbers at the last general election, they will always vote for us. When you start taking people for granted, when you assume they'll always vote for you, do you know what? Eventually, they don't always vote for you. So both morally and electorally, it's very important that we look after and respond to all of our heartlands.
Thank you. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists and to our people who've put forward questions. So Richard will be with us. What I've taken is that Richard will be with us shoulder to shoulder in our campaigns and in empowering us as members. He will work towards a peace pledge and our internationalist socialist principles, and has committed to public ownership and reversing privatisation. So I came to this meeting, you won't be surprised, intending to vote Richard for deputy. I have not changed my mind. And I'm even more determined to take this message out to anyone else who has got a vote to vote Richard for deputy. Now, there was a sign-up sheet as you came in. So information is going to be emailed to you rather than give you sheets to carry around and lose or whatever it might be. So expect an email. Richard's campaign has got a website, so sign up there as well if you want to accelerate the process. And it just leaves me to hand over to Peter Leary for some notices. But before we do that, can we give a huge round of applause to Huda, to Richard, and to Laura for tonight.